So talk to us about the book. First of all, why the need? Why the need for an honest book of presidents? Why the title?
Bunch of reasons. One is that next year is our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the birth of the United States of America. And what better way to understand America than through the presidents? Biographies are a great way to learn history, and a great way to learn American history is through the biographies of the presidents. So this book, The Honest Book of Presidents, is not only biographies of all the presidents, Washington through Trump, it's also a biography of the United States of America. And if we're going to have a shared future, we need to have a shared past. We can disagree on political issues, but we have to have a basic historical background that we can all agree on. And this book is an effort to kind of establish that background.
I have a lot of questions. Regarding this, we have to have a shared experience. Let's talk about George Washington. I've heard people on the left denigrate George Washington because he owned slaves. Forget about being the general of the Continental Army, being unanimously chosen to be president, elected again, walking away after 8 years because he thought 8 years was enough, setting forth the idea of just 2 terms until FDR shattered that. How do you respond when people say stuff like that? Well, he owned slaves.
Well, part of it is in the title of the book, The Honest Book of Presidents. And the honest, we could have named it The Contextual Book of Presidents, but that's not quite as catchy a title. In order to understand American history, you just have to understand context. You have to understand the time these people lived. And if you don't do that, then you're not being fair to them. You're not being fair to the history of America. So to understand George Washington, you have to understand the world he lived in. And in the world he lived in, slavery, because it had been since almost the beginning of time, an institution that just has always existed as far back as anybody can remember. That's the world he grew up in. It was the world that he grew up in, a world Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and everyone who lived in the United States grew up in.
And Abraham Lincoln, which we'll come to next. 888-971-7243. My guest is Allen Estrin. The book is called The Honest Book of Presidents. When is it out?
It just came out last week.
Last week, okay. Don't leave town. So, Allen, let's skip over to Abraham Lincoln. What is it the book tells us about Abraham Lincoln that people don't know?
Well, I think what people don't know is that Abraham Lincoln did not believe the South was going to wage war against the North.
And a lot of people didn't.
When he came in, when he was elected, I mean, obviously, nothing is obvious. It was a very bitter election. He was not on the ballot in almost all of the southern states. And the South, the leadership in the South had threatened to secede if he were to be elected. But they had done that for the last basically 40 years. There was the Missouri Compromise in 1820 was a result of the South saying we're going to secede unless you meet our needs and establish slavery in a certain way. And then there was the Compromise of 1850, was also a big confrontation between the North and the South, where the South said, we're going to secede unless these certain conditions are met. And in every case, they threatened and threatened and threatened, and then some kind of compromise was realized, or they just simply backed down. And that's what Lincoln thought would happen. But things were too far gone.
Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that there were 600,000 lives lost, obviously, not to mention those injured, that there is an argument that we should have allowed the South to secede and that ultimately slavery would have fallen on its own weight. What is your reaction to that argument?
It's one of those theoreticals that might be fun to think about and talk about, but I don't think there's any evidence that would have been the case. The war had been building up, as I mentioned, essentially since the start of the country. And we were talking about George Washington a little bit earlier, and the founders and their attitudes towards slavery. The founders hated slavery. They knew it was a problem. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. The guy knew what he was writing was, and what he was living were in contradiction. And they all struggled with it. And they believed it was going to fade away on its own. It might have done so had not the cotton gin been invented in the early 19th century and then made cotton the most profitable crop in the history of the world. That led to slavery becoming something that became economically profitable for the South. But a showdown was going to happen, and it just happened during Lincoln's administration. It was inevitable. It's not something. Would it have faded away? Yeah, maybe. But how many more years of slavery could the country stand? Not many.
Let's jump to FDR. What is FDR's legacy?
FDR is a very difficult legacy to assess because he's really two different presidents. The Great Depression, FDR was not a successful president. FDR, and the historian who does the FDR biography, Amity Shlaes, Amity says that FDR put the great in the Great Depression by trying to socially engineer the country out of the Great Depression. He just made it worse. So he was in some ways a big failure economically. But as a wartime president, he was a tremendous success. And the reason why he was a success was because he reversed his basic fundamental understanding of government during the war. And what I mean by that is that he trusted free enterprise to bring the United States of America to a war footing. I mean, he turned free enterprise loose during the war, and the power that was unleashed by that. He basically said to the guy who ran the war effort from terms of producing munitions, who was the head of General Motors, do what you need to do. And it was a big contrast about a big difference from what he did during the Depression. So you have a success and a failure.
And he saw the threat of Hitler well before a lot of other people did, and
Yes.
tried to warn against it. We only have 2 minutes left in this segment. I have to ask you about the first black president, Barack Obama. What is his legacy?
For me, and for Carol Swain, who did his biography, his legacy is he's the most disappointing of all the presidents. And the reason I say that is because he had it in his power to end racial America. Had Barack Obama said, "Look, it's over. Look who's standing in front of you."
Had he been the guy that he was in 2004 when he gave that speech in Boston?
Exactly correct.
I was there. Yeah.
Exactly correct. Had he been that guy, said, "No more excuses. We're not going to talk about race anymore. Who's the president of the United States? There's just no case to be made. I'm not going to hear any excuses." Those days we're now in a post-racial America. Had he done that and lived it, we'd be living in a different country, a better country. He could have been the greatest president in American history, and in fact, he made things worse.
I often talk about his appearance on 60 Minutes. This is when he was running for the nomination against Hillary. And he was asked by Steve Croft, "If you don't win, will it be because of racism?" I'm home by myself, Alan. I sat back. I said, "Let's see how this man answers." And he said, to his credit, "No. If I don't win, it will be because I've not articulated a vision that the American people can embrace. That's the guy America thought they hired. The one they hired was the one who said, if I had a son who looked like Trayvon, the Cambridge police acted stupidly, embracing Black Lives Matter, had Al Sharpton to the White House a bunch of times. In an interview said that racism is in America's DNA. On and on and on and on. Real quickly, Alan, as you know, I've done 2 chapters. They're both on JFK. And I guess my overall thing is that if JFK were alive today, he'd be a Republican.
No question.
He was a Cold War warrior. He was a strong believer in the Second Amendment. He was a hunter, for crying out loud. Abortion wasn't an issue then, but his sister was an adamant proponent of pro-life issues. There's every reason to believe he felt the same way. He believed in lower taxes. He did the Kennedy tax cut, which came into being after he was assassinated. And I believe that his legacy is also one of civil rights. Johnson was his VP. Had he not been assassinated, it's hard to say whether or not the civil rights legislation would have gotten through, but I believe eventually it would have. And he's a great hero to the left, but they ignore all these other things I mentioned about him.
JFK would, as you point out, would have been a conservative today.
Okay, most overrated president.
Most overrated. You just mentioned him. I think the most overrated president is LBJ. Mm-hmm. He passed literally hundreds of social programs. They had no idea how to execute these programs. It's a classic case, Tom Sowell, stage 1 thinking. They sounded great, but they didn't know how to execute them, and it caused a lot of problems.
Destroyed the nuclear family.
Totally.
Who wrote the LBJ one?
Amity Shlaes and Bill Whittle.
Most underrated.
Most
president.
Underrated, no question, Calvin Coolidge.
Yes.
He
cut taxes, cut the size of government.
Calvin Coolidge believed in the American people. He unleashed the Roaring '20s.
Gets no respect.
Gets no respect because he was quiet. They used to call him Silent Cal.
Yeah.
And his attitude was, look, I'm not going to interfere unless I have to interfere. He believed, and that's the secret to being a great president. He believed in the American people.
Story about Silent Cal. This reporter sits next to him and says, I was bet that I could get you to say more than 2 words. And Calvin Coolidge said, you lose. The book is called The Honest Book of Presidents, written by Allen Estrin. Allen, has it been reviewed yet?
We haven't had any. It's brand new. It just came out,
right.
So we haven't had any publication reviews. It has some Amazon reviews, and they've been very favorable.
So each president had a different author, each chapter?
Each chapter. Well, some historians did multiple presidents,
mm-hmm.
but basically each president has a different author. And as I say, Larry, it's a biography of the presidents, and it's a biography of the
America.
United States of
30
America.
seconds. Are we going to have a female president in the near future? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I don't care. If she shares my values, that's all I care about.
888-971 SA Good Answer. 888-971-7243. Alan, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. It's an honor and a privilege.
God bless.